Hello, my name is Stephanie and welcome, or if you're coming back, welcome back. Either way, I'm glad you're here and I hope you're well. And today we're once again discussing the masterpiece of domestic horror that is My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews. So spoilers for the aforementioned My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews, as well as major content warning for intimate partner violence, CSA, child abuse, child neglect, misogyny, emotional abuse, psychological abuse is kind of the best way I can describe some of the things that happen in this, although psychological torture might be a better descriptor, but we'll get to all that. Medical abuse, suicide, suicidal ideation, and ableism. It's a lot. It's already been a lot, and believe it or not, there is still a lot more to come. So, for your reference, this is also the second part of our discussion about this book. Sorry again for the unintentional cliffhanger. I think due to the length of the video, I was having some trouble uploading it, hence the splitting it into two parts. Again, sorry about the unintentional cliffhanger, but on to the rest of the nightmare that is Audrina Adair's life. In the last video, we left off with Elsbeth dying after deciding to leave Damian and Whitefern once and for all, and the check that he wrote her for $50,000 disappearing, not to be found either on her or anywhere in the house. Fearing for her and Sylvia's safety, as Audrina is convinced that Damian killed Elsbeth rather than let her leave him, Audrina and Sylvia flee to Arden and Billy's house, where Audrina suggests that she and Arden, get married so that she can be free of Damian. While Billy is initially hesitant, again, Arden and Audrina are quite young, and she's kind of worried they're rushing into things. Arden has wanted to marry Audrina for years. He has loved her for years, and he is absolutely overjoyed at this idea and immediately agrees. So the three of them, Arden, Audrina, and Sylvia, they originally intended to leave Sylvia with Billy, but she refused to leave Audrina, so along for the ride she went. The three of them head to North Carolina, where Arden and Audrina get married, and have, to put it mildly, to say the least, a disaster of a wedding night, during which Audrina experiences flashes of memories to the day first Audrina died that contradict what she's been told about that day her entire life. Specifically, that it seems like first Audrina did not die that day at the base of the tree where she was attacked, but she seems to have actually survived that initial attack and tried to make it home. She also saw Arden present at the attack. Again, this makes absolutely no sense because first Audrina is supposed to have died 9 years before Audrina was even born. So Arden couldn't have been there because he wouldn't have been alive when this happened. She is, understandably, very disturbed by these things. Audrina initially chalks them up to her, again, to put it very mildly, anxiety and discomfort about her wedding night manifesting in a weird way because, yeah, trauma is weird and it can manifest in some really weird and sometimes unsettling and disturbing ways that you're not expecting. And Audrina has very much been traumatized by her childhood and the way she grew up. And although she is absolutely terrified of sex and did not want to have sex, she felt that she had to because she loves Arden. She loves him, and he wanted to, but also that this was what was expected of her and what she felt she had to do in order to finally escape from her father, which is just devastating and heartbreaking on just so many levels. It's absolutely devastating. And things really don't get better for her from here. Like I said, it's a lot, and it's going to continue to be a lot. And that's what you missed on Glee. A few days later, Arden, Audrina, and Sylvia finally return to Whitefern with the intention of getting the rest of their things and leaving once and for all. And when they arrive, they find Damian and Billy are waiting for them. And while he's all smiles when he greets them, Audrina knows that this is just an act, and he is pissed. Damian very much views Audrina as his. She belongs to him. She has to do what he says all the time. And he is angry at her for leaving him, for defying him, for daring to want to leave Whitefern and him, and daring to want to have her own life. And although he is all smiles and is seemingly happy to see them come home and congratulates them on their marriage, Audrina knows him. She has known him her entire life. She knows that this is just an act, and he is actually furious with her. Although he is all smiles, his anger does manifest in some little ways. When he goes to hug her, he pinches her really, really hard. Like he pinches his own weirdo. That's weirdo behavior. And for the first time, Audrina actually calls him out on it. And he is a complete dick to her, excuse the language. 3 times he kissed my cheeks, one then the other, but at the same time he managed to reach behind me to pinch my bottom so hard I wanted to cry out. This kind of pinch was meant to test a woman's endurance, and her reactions were noted, labeled, and filed. Let him label me as he would. Don't you ever pinch me like that again, I said fiercely. That hurts. I don't like it. I have never liked it, neither did my mother or my aunt. My, what a saucy bit of baggage you've become in 4 days, he said with a wide, mocking grin. Then he reached out to playfully pat my cheek, and it felt like a slap. Despite the act that he's putting on, Damian is not going to let Audrina go that easily. Again, in his eyes, she belongs to him. She is his, as much as Whitefern is his. So he casually mentions to Arden that Billy happened to mention that Arden was having trouble finding work. For your reference, Arden graduated from college with a degree in architecture, and he's been struggling to find a job. And because he's been struggling, Damian offers Arden a job at his firm. And not only that, he hires him in an architect capacity to begin restoring Whitefern. Again, I mentioned in the first video that Whitefern was once this grand and beautiful house that has kind of very much fallen into disarray over the years as the family's prominence and prestige has kind of waned. And because they're all family now, he of course moved Billy into the house. He moved her specifically into Elsbeth's room. For your reference, this woman hasn't even been dead a week at this point. Arden and Audrina have only been married 4 days. Elsbeth hasn't even been dead a week, and there is already somebody else in her room. Damian has already replaced her with Billy. There, it just makes sense, of course, for Arden and Audrina to stay there. Sylvia is there, Billy is there, and since Arden is going to be working with Damian anyway and restoring Whitefern, it just makes sense for them to stay there in Whitefern. Because Damian is very much a master manipulator, Arden accepts his offer, and Audrina is once again trapped in Whitefern under her father's control, because she is his. And he will not let her go. To see Arden so grateful when he should have known better. Perhaps all men were more or less alike and understood each other very well. I raged inside that Papa was still controlling my life, even though I was married. So Audrina's plan failed. Despite everything she tried, she is still trapped in Whitefern under Damian's control. So Arden and Audrina move into Whitefern. And with Audrina's help, Arden is able to take and pass the accounting exam and begins working with Damian at his firm in town. And it's while he's working for Damian and redoing Whitefern, except for first Audrina's playroom, which is not to be touched by anyone or changed in any way whatsoever, Arden learns some very interesting things. The first is that while people view Damian as this stock genius who makes a fortune in the stock market, he's mostly just a charming snake oil salesman who is embezzling like crazy from his own firm. We're talking like felony levels of embezzlement here. And not only that, he's been selling off antiques and rare pieces from Whitefern when he's short on money and replacing them with fakes and reproductions. Once again, kind of keep up appearances that the family still has that old power and prestige, but also to kind of present that he is successful in what he does. But in addition to him selling off pieces of Whitefern and replacing them with fakes and reproductions, we also know that he lost both Lucky and Elsbeth's inheritances. And he's been selling off pieces of their family home. Nothing ever really comes of either of these things, but it's worth noting that Damian is a liar. And if Damian is talking, Damian is lying. He is a lying liar who lies. And it's not long after they move in that Damian soon begins sleeping with Billy. Again, he moved her pretty quickly into Elsbeth's room. Elsbeth hadn't even been dead a week at that point. He moved her in to replace Elsbeth because, of course, he does. And she starts keeping house for him because Damian uses women. He uses the women around him, and he cannot function alone, seemingly. So with Elsbeth gone, he had to replace her. And he replaced her with Billy. Reference, Audrina doesn't find out the two of them are sleeping together until much later on, but it starts pretty soon after they move into the house, seemingly. Not only that, both Billy and Arden seem to have bought his act and see him as this slightly overbearing but charming and loving father. Though again, Papa had won. Aunt Elsbeth was dead. She had not saved me any more than she'd saved herself. Only Papa was free, time and again, to hurt those he claimed to love most. Eventually, despite feeling trapped in the house and trapped under Damian, with both Arden and Billy buying his act, Audrina soon starts questioning herself. Maybe she was wrong about Damian, and while things aren't perfect, they are way better than they were. Arden has a good job. Whitefern is being restored to its former glory for the first time in years. Billy and Damian are seemingly happy, and Sylvia is making great strides with her walking and talking. For your reference, Sylvia is partially verbal, but with Billy and Audrina working with her, she is to communicate verbally more and more. And I think it really says something that one of the first things she says is Vera bad, because Sylvia knows that Vera has bad vibes. It's worth noting. Speaking of Vera, because this is Whitefern and we can't have nice things, Vera comes home on Thanksgiving for the first time in more than 3 years, and she has not changed. As soon as she walks in the door, she immediately starts mocking Audrina and threatening to steal her husband. She is still the same person that left that day. Billy, being the person that she is kind and welcoming to Vera, so Audrina has to play nice. She's better than me. I would have pushed Vera out the door and shut it in her face. Like I said, she's better than me. Damian comes home and sees Vera and tells her to get out, that she's not welcome here anymore, and that she can't stay. But Vera insists that she's changed. Losing Lamar was devastating to her, and she's really had to struggle on her own since he died. And she's a nurse now. She takes care of people. She helps people. She's totally changed, and Billy stands up for her. And because Damian can't let his facade drop around Billy, he reluctantly agrees to let her stay. But only for Thanksgiving. However, not unlike Damian, soon begin putting on an act for Billy, and the two soon grow very, very close. He does genuinely seem to care for Vera and believe that she has changed. And meanwhile, Vera mocks her behind her back and doesn't even like Billy touching her because, if you remember, lost both of her legs to diabetes. And Vera cannot stand the thought of Billy touching her because she has a limb difference. Again, Vera is a nurse. Vera is a nurse. While she might have Billy fooled, Vera is still an absolute monster to Sylvia. She makes absolutely vile comments to her and about her, to her literal face. Sylvia, for your reference, is 10 years old at this point, and Vera, however old she is a grown woman. Things finally come to a head when Vera walks in on Audrina helping Sylvia work on her speech, and Sylvia loses it. She jumps on Vera and starts hitting and scratching and biting her. Good for her, honestly. She's just sick of Vera tormenting her and her sister. But Vera, being bigger, manages to push her off. And when she goes to kick Sylvia, she trips and breaks her leg. Whether this was accidental or on purpose, I couldn't say. But regardless, she's not going anywhere anytime soon. And she even goes so far as to tell Billy and Damian that Sylvia actually broke her leg on purpose, which did not happen regardless of whether she broke her leg on purpose or an accident. It was not Sylvia who did it. Thankfully, they don't believe her. But regardless, she can't travel anytime soon, and it's not long after that Audrina and Billy are forced to care for her as she recovers. And then once she does, she just doesn't leave. She got back in, and she's not leaving anytime soon. Then one day, not long after Audrina finally discovers that Billy and Damian have been sleeping together, she's initially devastated at this revelation because she does very much view Billy as a mother figure, and she saw that the way Damian treated not just her mother but her aunt. But eventually Audrina comes around and does eventually accept the two are together. Again, she didn't realize they'd been together this whole time, so she has finally come to the realization that they are. Again, not long after she discovers the two of them are together, she and Sylvia are playing hide and seek in the woods, and Audrina can't find her. She can't find her to the point where she eventually goes home to search for her, thinking that maybe she got bored and just kind of went back home. And it's when she arrives back at Whitefern that she finds Billy at the bottom of the stairs, dead. Just like Elsbeth. And she thinks Sylvia did it, because she loved to play with Billy's cart, and Audrina thinks that maybe she pushed her in order to get at the cart, not fully understanding what she was doing, and that she could, and maybe did, hurt Billy. And Vera, who was in the house alone, with Billy, says that she heard her yell at Sylvia just before she heard a crash. And I'm going to be honest, I straight up think Vera is lying and that she pushed Billy down the stairs. Just like she did with Elsbeth. Because, yeah, Vera killed her mother. Vera, if you remember back in the first part of this video, frequently stole from Elsbeth before she ran away from Whitefern. And to hear Vera's version of the story, she didn't learn that her mother was dead until a friend in town sent her the obituary. But I think that's a lie. I think she came back to Whitefern just as Elsbeth was getting ready to leave, and the two fought, as they often did. And whether it was an accident or she did it on purpose, I think Vera pushed Elsbeth. And then once she realized what she had done, she took the check and left. Because when Audrina discovered Elsbeth, she heard someone leave through the kitchen. But that someone wasn't Damian or Sylvia, who came from a totally different part of the house. But since the check would have been made out to Elsbeth, she probably couldn't cash it and then came back to Whitefern a few months later. Again, Vera basically admits that she killed Elsbeth near the very end of the book, but this is kind of my theory as to what happened and why she did it. That's why I think she killed Elsbeth. But why kill Billy? Because of Damian. Damian was talking about marrying Billy, and despite her hatred of him, Vera still wants his love and attention more than anything in the world. And Billy was the one getting that love and attention, so Billy had to go. Also, Vera is an ableist weirdo. She is an ableist weirdo. She was physically disgusted at the idea of Billy, who had a limb difference, touching her. And I also think this is why she tries to blame Sylvia for Billy's death. And why she blamed her for breaking her leg, so that she would be sent to an asylum, because she hates Sylvia probably as much as she hates Audrina. Because why did Damian love her and not Vera? This is all a theory on my end, but again, at the end of the book, Vera does basically admit to killing Elsbeth. This is just my theory about everything else that kind of transpired in relation to that. You can imagine how this looks to the police. Two women fall down the stairs and die pretty shortly after one another. Once is an accident, twice is suspicious as hell. But in the end, Billy's death is ruled an accident. We all look too grief-stricken to be murderers, or Papa had strings he pulled, for again, another death at Whitefern was called accidental. It was Damian's doing, using his money and influence, or whether or not they genuinely thought no one in the house did it. Regardless, Billy's death is labeled an accident, and she is laid to rest in the family plot not far from Whitefern. Arden, Audrina, and Damian are devastated by Billy's death, and this horrible pall settles over Whitefern now that she's gone. And as much as Audrina loves Sylvia, she can't help but be a little afraid of her now, because what if she did accidentally hurt Billy? Even if that wasn't her intention, what if she caused her death? Billy gone, again, the two of them were incredibly close, closer than she ever was to Elsbeth or even her own mother. And now that she's gone, Audrina falls into this deep depression, and she can't even get out of bed most days. It's after Billy's death that Arden and Vera begins to grow closer. and he and Audrina begin fighting more. They are both deeply unhappy in their marriage, and finally, about 2 years after Billy's death, Audrina is 22 at this point, probably. For your reference, they've been married 3 years, so she's probably about 22. Arden finally tells Audrina that he wants a divorce if she won't sleep with him. The implication here being that they have not slept together since their wedding night 3 years ago, and he basically admits to sleeping with Vera and having an affair with her, and that he wants to leave Audrina so that he can be with Vera. You can't love me, Audrina, then let me go. Set me free to find someone who will love me as I want and need to be loved. I force myself to say indifferently, Vera. Yes, he bit out, Vera. At least she isn't cold and unresponsive. He's gross. She treats me like a man. I'm not a saint or a devil, Audrina, just a man who has desires you won't satisfy. I've tried for almost 3 years, oh how I've tried, but you won't yield, and now I'm tired of trying and I want out. I'm going to divorce you and marry Vera, unless you can love me physically as much as you love me in other ways. So this is manipulative and gross, and I hate him. Regardless of all that, and my God is it a lot, the two do genuinely love and care for each other, and they decide to start over, to give their relationship one final shot. And once they do that, they finally sleep together consensually, and Audrina even enjoys it for the first time, and the two begin repairing things between them. And for the first time since Billy died, maybe for the first time in a really, really long time, Audrina actually begins to feel hopeful in Whitefern. For the first time after making love, I felt clean and worthy of staying alive. Unlike Papa, who loved the first Audrina best, Arden loved me for what I was, not what he wanted me to be. Yeah, things are really messed up between them, but they've decided to stick it out, to work on them, to be better. Maybe things are going to be okay. Just kidding. Same night, after the two decide to give their relationship another chance, Audrina feels drawn to the playroom. And once she gets to the playroom, she decides that she is going to sit in the rocking chair and revisit that day, the day that first Audrina died. Except this time, she's going to watch what happens to her to the very end as a way to let her go once and for all, to finally exorcise this ghost that has been haunting her all her life. And so she sits in the rocking chair, and just like Damian taught her, she rocks and sings and rocks and sings. And this time, Audrina becomes first Audrina, and through her eyes relives that day, the day that she died. For the first time, all these pieces and fragments of memory finally become a full picture. As first Audrina, again, Audrina has become first Audrina, so we see that despite Lucky's warnings about not cutting through the woods, first Audrina doesn't want to ride the bus because there's a group of boys on there who have been bullying her. And make no mistake, she gives to them as good as she gets, but it's gotten to the point where she doesn't want to ride the bus with these boys, and it's her birthday. She doesn't want to put up with that. So instead of taking the bus home, she cuts through the woods, just like her parents have warned her not to. And as she's making her way home, it starts to rain. And it's when it starts to rain that she realizes that someone is following her. And it's the 3 boys from the bus, the boys who bully her. And although she tries to get away, they catch her and drag her to the base of the tree where they assault her. And while this is happening, first Audrina sees someone else in the woods, someone who is watching this happen, a friend of hers whom she begs for help. But this friend runs away in fear and leaves her to the mercy of these 3 boys. And when Audrina finally comes back to herself, she realizes that the friend that she saw that left first Audrina was Arden. Arden was in the woods that day. He saw what happened all those years ago, and she is shattered by this. Everything Arden has ever told her, everything that she knows about him, is a lie, and that is devastating. The lies they told me to shield me from knowing just who Arden was. Oh, no wonder Papa had warned me against all boys, and Arden most of all. Papa knew him for what he was, a coward. As bad as the others, maybe worse, for she'd known him, trusted him, thought him her friend, and he'd turned me years later, he'd been there. Through me, he was redeeming himself. Audrina has always thought that Arden was the first, maybe even the only person other than Sylvia, who truly saw Audrina for Audrina and not as a replacement for first Audrina. But the realization that he was there that day, that he saw what happened, makes her question everything that she knows about him, and she starts to think that Arden doesn't love her at all, that he's just been using her as a kind of redemption to undo and make up for what he did, or rather failed to do, for first Audrina by loving and taking care of her. Then there's this realization that Damian lied to her about when all this happened. Because again, if first Audrina was actually 9 years older than Audrina, Arden wouldn't have been there. Like her, he wouldn't have been born yet. And Audrina feels horrified and guilty, like she's betrayed her sister somehow by marrying the boy who left her there. Then there's the lies upon lies that literally everyone has been telling her entire life. And she has had enough of the lies. So Audrina heads back to her room, intending to drag Arden physically out of bed if she has to, and confront him and make him tell her the truth. Only to realize as she's making her way back to their room that someone is following her through the halls. And when Audrina turns around to confront who she thinks is Arden, someone pushes her down the stairs. Yes, really. And again, I think this was Vera, especially given what happens next, because Audrina doesn't die like Elsbeth and like Billy. She falls into a coma where she's in this catatonic state, but she can hear and see everything that's going on around her, but she cannot move. She is very much at the mercy of those around her, which is really not so different for how her entire life's been if you think about it. One of the first things she hears when she comes to is Vera, who is serving as her live-in nurse, and she's back home at Whitefern, trying to convince Arden to take her off life support so that they can be together, because she's tired of being the other woman. Oh, and also because she totally doesn't want Audrina to suffer anymore. Definitely that, and not that other thing that I just said. But Arden won't do it. He won't let Audrina go. So Vera threatens to leave, but Arden begs her to stay with him. Because in a lot of ways, he's not unlike Damian. He cannot be alone. He cannot be without a woman in his life to take care of him. And so he tells Vera that he does love her. Not like he loves Audrina, but he does love her. And if she gives him time, he'll eventually let Audrina go so that they can be together. Have I mentioned to you guys how much I hate him? Completely helpless and unable to move or call for help, Audrina is left under Vera's care. Please imagine the air quotes. And she uses this as an opportunity to abuse Audrina. She is rough with her. She bruises her. She scratches her. She throws her all around while she's taking care of her. Again, imagine the air quotes. All the while, she and Arden are sleeping together. In her free time, she is still continuing to torment Sylvia. And Sylvia seems to be the only one who sees what Vera is doing, because she steps up to really try to protect Audrina. She bites and hits Vera when she tries to hurt Audrina, and Vera hits and kicks her back. Again, she is a grown woman beefing with a literal child. But as the days pass, Arden starts to think, with Vera constantly in his ear, that maybe it would be kinder and Audrina would be better off if she just died. But he's not moving fast enough for Vera's liking. So one day, while Arden and Damian are out of the house for a business conference in the next town over, Vera simply decides she's waited long enough and she's going to finish Audrina off. So she disconnects Audrina's life support, something that she sets up to frame Sylvia for, by the way, I think is a way to finally get her out of the house, and goes upstairs to get ready for a night on the town and essentially leaves Audrina to die. But she doesn't leave her alone. She leaves her with Sylvia. And it takes everything she has, every bit of strength that she's managed to muster. But Audrina, for the first time in weeks, finally manages to speak. And she begs Sylvia to help her. And using Billy's cart, remember how I told you to remember the cart? We're back to the cart. And she uses Billy's cart to get Audrina out of the room and, most importantly, away from Vera. She ends up hiding Audrina in the playroom, and while Vera tears the house apart looking for the two of them, Sylvia leads her away from Audrina, who ends up passing out from the pain. And she comes to sometimes later, but thankfully, and I never thought I'd be happy to see these two, Damian and Arden are back home by this time and have found her and are overjoyed that she's awake. But she's in such a bad state from the abuse that she suffered under Vera, not to mention being in a literal coma, that she needs to be rushed back to the hospital, where she finally gets actual care and, believe it or not, begins to recover. Amazing what can happen when you're not just being abused by a medical professional. And it's while she's in the hospital that Audrina finally confronts them, demands that they tell her the truth. Was Arden in the woods that day? And Arden finally does tell her the truth, that yes, he was in the woods that day. And Audrina refuses to allow him in her hospital room and basically bars him from seeing her. Good for her, as she should. But it's Damian, of all people, who keeps begging her to forgive Arden, which, hating Arden was kind of the one thing Damian and I agreed on, so I felt kind of betrayed by that, I'm not gonna lie. After a lengthy hospital stay and pretty significant physical therapy, Audrina is finally cleared to go home many weeks later, and she wants Vera out of the house. And Damian is immediately like, yeah, totally, she sucks and she's gotta go, but while you were in the hospital, she fell and broke her arm. Again, whether this was an accident or on purpose, I can't say. If I were a betting woman, though, my money would be on purpose. So she has to stay until she recovers. But Audrina does not care anymore. Broken arm or not, she wants Vera gone. Because she needs the space to decide what she's going to do with her relationship with Arden. And she needs Vera out of the house to do that. And almost as soon as she gets home, Arden immediately starts trying to justify sleeping with Vera because, my God, what else was he supposed to do? But Audrina is not falling for his guilt trip this time. She's got a brand new, shiny spine, and she is not going to put up with any of his BS, especially not given what she heard him and Vera talking about while she was in her coma. I'm going upstairs, please don't follow me. I don't need you anymore, Arden. I know you and Vera plan to kill me. I used to have faith in you, such trust that I found the one man in this hateful world who would always be there when I needed him. But you failed me. You wanted me dead, so you could have her. His face turned white, and he was so shocked that his voice ran away and left him speechless. I used the opportunity to head for the stairs. In another moment he rushed to stop me, catching me easily since I moved so slowly. What's ahead of us now that you hate me? He asked hoarsely. Without answering, I passed on by the room we'd shared. Though when I looked in there, I saw my regular large bed was back, and the narrow one had been carted away. Everything had been refurbished, so there was nothing left to remind me of all those dreadful days when I'd lay there unmoving and waiting to die. Where are you going? What right did he have to ask me anything? He didn't belong in my life now. Let Vera have him. She is done with him. He and Vera deserve each other, so let them have each other. Besides, she has more important things to worry about. She needs to finally find out the truth of what exactly has been going on inside this hellhole all these years. Because, again, she is sick of being lied to. And she deserves to know the truth after all these years. I mentioned way back in the very beginning of the first part of the first video that Audrina was a really anxious and fearful kid. And all her life, and especially afraid of the attic, to the point where she never goes up there and does her best to avoid going up there at all costs. But now she finally ascends the stairs and goes to the windows and looks out over the grounds. And Damian follows her, and as soon as he sees her standing at the window, he freaks out and yanks her back. And he is terrified to see her in the attic and near the window. And the two finally have their confrontation, and Audrina demands that he tells her the truth. And Damian finally tells her the truth. And it's worse than she could have imagined. And it's here where I'm going to give another specific content warning for SA. I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but it's rough. I'm also going to add child abuse and suicide here as well. Again, this is not an easy section. It's not graphic, but it's rough. So there's a time skip in the pinned comment if you need it. And the truth is that first Audrina didn't die that day. The boys attacked her and left her for dead, but she survived. Not only did she survive, she made it back to Whitefern, humiliated and scared and hurt, where she found Lucky, who immediately realized what happened and took her upstairs and, in a tub filled with scalding water, literally started scrubbing her down so hard that she took off her skin, telling her that Damian didn't ever need to know what happened. And because all her life Damian had always emphasized her being his good, pure girl, and now with her mother literally trying to scrub away what happened to her, Audrina thought that because of what happened to her, what those monsters did to her, that she was dirty and bad, that she shouldn't have lived, that she should have died. And it's Elsbeth who finally called Damian at work and told him what happened. And when he rushed home and Audrina saw him, she ran up to the attic and tried to jump out the window. Thankfully, Damian was able to save her, but she was shattered by what happened to her. She stopped eating and kept trying to hurt herself. So Damian saved, please imagine the air quotes, her. This is a long passage, and it's a lot. Buckle up. Strange light in his eyes frightened me. I couldn't let her die, he went on, his eyes riveted to mine, pinning me to him like butterflies were pinned to a board. If she died, part of me would have died too, and she would have taken that gift of hers into the grave, and never again would I have known 1 second of happiness. I saved her. I saved her in the only way I knew how. Like water sinking into concrete, something was trying to filter into my brain, some knowledge that hovered on the brink of being born. How did you save her? My sweet Audrina, haven't you guessed yet? Haven't I explained and given you all the clues you need? Vera is not my first Audrina. You are. No, I screamed, I can't be. She's dead, buried in the family cemetery. We went there every Sunday. She's not dead because you are alive. There was no first Audrina, because you are my first and only Audrina. And if God strikes me dead for telling a lie, then let him strike me dead. I am telling you the truth. That is the truth of it. There never was a first Audrina. Audrina is the first Audrina, the only Audrina there has ever been. Her life has been a lie. She was the one who was assaulted and left for dead that day. That grave that they made her visit every Sunday was empty. But why? How? Well, like I told you way back in the very beginning, the answer is all at once horrifyingly simple and horrifyingly complex. Damian is a whack job. To save, please imagine the air quotes, Audrina from what happened to her, Damian took Audrina to receive ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, electric shock therapy as it's called in the book, to forget what happened to her. And he forced everyone in the house to go along with this, whether they wanted to or not. That the assault didn't happen to her, but to an older sister who died, and that Audrina was actually 7 years old and not 9 years old, 2 years younger than she really was. He told her this over and over and over again, until she believed him. And the family made her doubt her own memory by messing with the clocks and never talking about their ages and being hyper-focused on her age and never having calendars or having the mail and the newspapers come on the wrong days and lying about the days and the months and the seasons and having a fucking grave dug and a marker put up over an empty grave. To say this is a lot is an understatement, because Jesus Christ. And Audrina is understandably distraught and confused and not sure what to believe because, again, her entire life has been a lie. So she runs out of the house to the cemetery because she has visited this grave every Sunday as long as she can remember and starts trying to dig it up because she has to know for sure. Whether it's empty or there's someone there, she has to know. Arden eventually follows her out of the house and tells her that Damian was telling the truth for once in his life. And the two end up having sex on the grave, which is a choice, and I'm not qualified to unpack it, so I'm not going to try to. And when they finally end up digging up the grave, there's nothing there. Because there was only ever one Audrina. Her. And now that she finally knows the truth, it's time to, for once, take control of a life that has never truly been hers. And so they go back to the house where Damian is waiting for them. And he tells them what I just told you, how he pulled this whole thing off. But also that he doesn't regret it, which is utterly deranged in a way that should probably be in the DSM-5. And while Audrina is trying to process all this, that the shadow she's been living in has been her own, that her life has never been her own, that everyone in that life has been lying to her, in comes Vera. Vera, who was the only one who knew Audrina wasn't riding the bus that day, and instead was cutting through the woods. Vera, who hated Audrina, who envied her, and thought Audrina stole the life and the love that should have been hers. Vera, who told the boys where she was. Vera, who set her up that day. And Audrina confronts her about this, tells her that she knows what she did to her all those years ago. And Vera, of course, denies this, but Damian has suspected her for years. Remember that conversation Audrina overheard between him and Elsbeth all those years ago? Yeah, Damian thought for years that Vera had something to do with Audrina's attack, but the only reason he didn't act on those suspicions was because Elsbeth kept denying that Vera had done anything and had protected her. But Elsbeth isn't here now to shield and protect her. While Vera never admits what she did to Audrina that day, she does tell Damian that as much as he would like to deny it, and as much as he hates her, she is very much her father's daughter. And like him, she will do anything to get what she wants. This is also when she tells them about the useless check she tried to cash, basically admitting that she kills Elsbeth. So Vera takes off, she runs, and Damian chases after her. But she doesn't get far because, guess what, folks? She trips and falls down the stairs. Yes, really. And although they rush Vera to the hospital, she ends up dying of her internal injuries not long after. And literally the only reason the police don't swarm Whitefern, because, again, Vera is the third person who's died this way, is because with her dying breath, she tells them that she tripped and fell. And I've thought about a lot about why she did this, because all her life she has threatened to ruin the Adaires. She has threatened to ruin Damian and Audrina. Literally all she would have had to do was say one of them pushed her. So why didn't she? Honestly, I think maybe it was one last-ditch attempt to show Damian that she loved him, that she was worthy of his love. And it was the last thing she ever did, because she ends up dying not long after they rush her to the hospital. Once they get back to Whitefern, Arden begs Audrina for forgiveness, for leaving her that day, for lying to her, for sleeping with Vera, for trying to kill her, for all of it. But Audrina isn't sure she has any more forgiveness left to give him. And even if she did, she's not sure that he deserves it. So once Vera is laid to rest, Audrina decides that it's time to leave Whitefern, and she's going to take Sylvia with her so that the two of them can have some shot at something resembling a normal life, something that is not possible in this house. Damian is distraught at this and tries to guilt her into staying, but Audrina is determined to do what Elsbeth couldn't, finally break away from Damian's control and leave Whitefern once and for all, because he's ruined the lives of everyone there. Lucky, Elsbeth, her, and Vera. But she will not let him do it to Sylvia. And Audrina deserves a life of her own, away from Whitefern and its ghosts and the horrible things that happened to her there. And Damian and Arden, honestly. But on the day that they're going to leave, Sylvia won't go. Oh, she breathed, putting up her hands as if to ward off an enemy. Stay here. Home. Again, although she loves Sylvia more than anything in the world, in a lot of ways she's very much like Sylvia's mother. As much as Audrina loves her, she cannot stay here. So she reluctantly decides to leave Sylvia there with Damian. And she tells Damian to take care of her, to love her the way he never loved Vera, so that she doesn't become angry and bitter and hurt the way Vera was. And Audrina leaves. She gets in the car, and in a perfect world, this is where I would tell you that she drives away and leaves us all behind. But, as you know, we can't have nice things. Because once Audrina gets in the car, she can't bring herself to start it. She can't bring herself to leave. So Audrina decides to stay. This is, for your reference, the last couple paragraphs of My Sweet Audrina. Papa's love for me, I just done the most noble deed of my life. I was the first and best Audrina who had always put love and loyalty first. There was no place for me to run. Shrugging, feeling sad yet cleaner than I had since that rainy day in the woods, I felt a certain kind of accepting peace as Arden put his arm about my shoulders. Automatically my arm encircled his waist, and together we headed back to the porch where Papa and Sylvia had come out to watch. I saw happiness and relief in both pairs of eyes. Arden and I would begin again in Whitefern, and if this time we failed, we'd begin a third time. A fourth. And Audrina decides not only to stay in Whitefern, but to stay with Arden. He is determined to make their marriage work, determined to replace the painful memories that Whitefern holds with new, happy ones, to make a real life for herself and her family here, a life that is truly hers, a life that she chooses. I have very mixed feelings about this ending. On the one hand, I get it. Every aspect of Audrina's life has been controlled, and in the end, it's her choice to stay. A choice she makes for herself to finally chase away the darkness that's haunted Whitefern and her, and make a real happy life for herself and her family in a place where she suffered so much. I get it. I do. On the other hand, I wish she'd been able to leave, to get away from Damian and Arden and Whitefern. She deserved to leave that place, and I wish she'd been able to. Also, I'm not crazy about that last comment about Damian's love for her being noble. What he did to her and everyone in that house was deranged and cruel and psychotic. And regardless of what his intentions were, he left a trail of devastation in his wake. His love isn't noble. It was cruel, and it was controlling. Like I said, I get why Audrina stays, but a part of me kind of wishes she hadn't. My Sweet Audrina is an absolute masterclass in psychological and familial horror that takes this really stark look at trauma and the wounds that it leaves, and how you can't just bury it. You have to deal with it, or it will never let you be free of it. You'll be forever haunted by it until you finally deal with it. My Sweet Audrina is unique because it's the only standalone novel V.C. Andrews wrote in her lifetime. All of her other works, the 4 Dollenganger novels, Heaven and Dark Angel, were part of series. At least that's what I thought, until I went to log this into Goodreads and I saw this. Audrina 1. What do you mean Audrina 1? Well, that's because in 2016, 34 years after My Sweet Audrina was originally published, a sequel was released to, you guessed it, tie in with a Lifetime movie adaptation of My Sweet Audrina that came out that same year. It's called Whitefern, and it picks up several years later, and I read it, and it's a mess. But more on that at a later but soonish date. I still haven't watched the Lifetime adaptation of My Sweet Audrina either, so we'll talk about that when we talk about Whitefern. But I did watch my friend go through the 5 stages of grief when I mentioned it, so I guess we'll see how that goes. As always, thanks so much for listening to all that, and until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.